I joined when I was in second grade. God, when would that have been? Early 2000s. Let's say that. My guess is before 2005, so 2003, 2004, maybe a little bit later than that, actually. Somewhere early 2000s. And then why did I join? I I initially got into Irish dance before joining IDCL. When I was really young, I was a very active child. And my mother and I were at Schuler's Books in Okemos location in the cafe area, and I was just bouncing around. I was probably like five or something. And Peggy came up to my mom and said, "Oh, your child has a lot of energy." And here I am, this 5-year-old redheaded child jumping around. Of course, Peggy came up to my mom and told her about Irish dance, specifically about the Heisman Irish Dance School, which of course I was interested in. And I ended up joining their school when I was in first grade with the idea of joining IDCL after that, about a year after. So I had to start in second grade or something like that. I danced with them for 11 years. We just did the typical stuff, right? Busiest time of the year was March. There was several shows we did, as well as practicing throughout the year. And I'm trying to figure out a good place to start. So I joined when I was in second grade, and there were a couple families there at the time who had been there for a while. Obviously, it had been going for a bit. This is probably 2004 that I joined more specifically. Yeah, I did a couple dances. I was, of course, the cute little kid that was in the Irish dance company. I think they threw, a very similar dress. I think the same dress that your youngest sister had. It was the same exact one that kind of gets passed along through a bunch of dance families as they're first joining. Oh man, there's just so much. I ended up dancing for a couple years. Obviously, it's only grade school kids that are in it. So I danced from second grade all the way to my senior year of high school. Of course, this involved all of the practicing, I got to basically see all stages from being a young kid in the group all the way to a senior and doing my senior dance. My younger sister joined a couple years after I did, and she danced basically the same amount of time that I did. I think she joined maybe in third grade versus I joined a little bit earlier. She then danced all the way through high school, and I believe, I'm not sure, was their grade the last grade for IDCL, or was that a year later? So I guess it ended a year after I left. I graduated in 2017. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. I think a lot of the ones that we did were retirement communities. But we danced at schools. We danced, one of the most memorable performances we ever did was the Knights of Columbus up in Gaylord, which is always like the highlight of the Gaylord trip. And we can get into the Gaylord trip too, and I can explain that a little bit. In the summers, we did a lot of like Renaissance fairs or Irish festivals that were outdoors, community bandstands, that kind of stuff as well. So, and then randomly, St. Patrick's Day in March threw in a couple curveballs of, some bars if you were a high schooler, but those are typical for us. Yeah. And then I can get into a little bit of Gaylord too. What's cool. So Gaylord was the first weekend of March. We went up on probably Thursday night, and then Friday, Saturday, we had performances. Friday was the all day kind of thing. We went to all of the elementary schools in the area, which is like one elementary school at like a Catholic church. But then we also did another elementary school, but it was like the public school. So all the high schoolers came down, middle schoolers, all to their gymnasium, and we performed there. Throw in a couple of retirement communities that were up there as well. And then this was all on Friday. And then we go back and, have a party at the hotel. But then Saturday was the Knights of Columbus show, which was kind of the big thing for all of us. And that one consisted of two set of performances split up in between by the Pub Runners, which is a band from the Gaylord area. I think the lead singer was the principal of of one of the schools down there. And yeah, we danced on top of a stage, not in like a weird way, but it's the Knights of Columbus. It was all Catholics, basically, right? And we'd be in the middle, surrounded by tables of people drinking, of course, green beer. And yeah, that would be the place where we'd feature the senior dance as well. Each year, the seniors got to do a senior dance kind of as a farewell and end of the start of the senior experience of high school. So it was also another fun weekend just as a bonding activity between all of us there. All of us would stay in a hotel. Sometimes, I feel like most of the time I remember it being treetops, but we stayed at a couple other hotels in the area where we would go swimming in the swimming pool, do crafts, have a big potluck. I remember when I was more specifically younger, we weren't staying at the Treetop Resort. We were staying, I believe, like at a Best Western or something that was right off the expressway. But the Abbotts always had the fancy suite room. And I always remembered the big girls hanging out there. And one year they invited me when I was like in sixth grade or something, and we'd play Just Dance. You had a lovely view of the chlorinated pool down below. This was not as bougie as Treetops was. That was a cooler one, but oh my God, yeah. And then my favorite was the hot tub that was outside. We'd go out into the snow and then jump back into the hot tub, and that couldn't have been good for anybody. And you just heard the most random stories. And, I don't know how much I really want to share about some of the stories I heard in that pool. I know a lot of the times Peggy put out a jar of candy and you'd have to guess how much candy was in there. I know some people brought video games. I mean, that had been going on since I was in elementary school. I remember Molly Stevens' younger brother and not Brian Reeves, Brian Martell playing Guitar Hero together in the basement. And I know by the time my sister was dancing and getting into Smash Bros, she would have a Smash Bros competition downstairs. By the time that we were at Treetops, I was mostly hanging out with Madison and Sarah Bennell Roberts and that group. And we were teenagers, so we were kind of ignoring all of the family because we were 16, 17 and kind of doing our own stuff of exploring the hotel. I'm sure being annoying 17-year-olds in a hotel. But potluck was all the like little fun prizes. Oh, there was tie-dye. We tie-dyed t-shirts a lot of years, plenty of years. And that was also really cool. Typical bonding experiences with everybody. They'd save a conference room at all of these hotels, and it was basically all access lounges and pizzas and anything else anybody brought. Peeps. Peeps were a big one, the green peeps. We weren't allowed to go, even though we were at a ski resort, we weren't allowed to go skiing because Peggy was afraid we'd break our legs skiing. We did go tubing. That was fun. We were allowed to go tubing. There was a lot of tubing. A lot of pool, a lot of tubes, a lot of random pizza. Oh, we used to go for a while before it started getting not as good. Big Bucks, which was a restaurant up in the Gaylord area. And we'd all go out to eat one night, or at least a lot of us would go out to eat one night to this brewery called Big Bucks in Gaylord. And I remember one time I was driving back to the hotel with Mackenzie. My mom was driving us, and I was sleep deprived. I think this was like a Friday night that we went, so I'd been dancing all day, and I called it Big Butts. So it turned into that. Yeah, that kind of memory stuff, that kind of, inside jokes and stuff you'd make with your family, memories, that kind of stuff. In between the retirement communities and the elementary schools, eventually ending up at the University Club at MSU, we would literally go and do a bar crawl around to the different bars in the Lansing area, dancing for tip money. I wasn't sure when it started. It was a little bit before my time being in high school, but that was specifically for high schoolers to go on St. Patrick's Day to get a little bit of extra tip money from a bunch of the bars in the Lansing area. What we would do is do maybe one big performance if a band was playing there because it was St. Patrick's Day, and we would dance maybe in this big group and then split off to go to tables and dance for tips. Yeah, my first one, I got invited early because I was such a mature child. Right, whatever. I got invited my eighth grade year to go with them, but that was cool. Definitely a busy day. That was the only time we ever got tips. We get hats. It was completely a nonprofit. I'm sure we got some donations at some point for people, but most of it was, almost all of it was out of the money of parents because we were high school. Unless the high schooler paid for it, but I doubt it. Yeah, all of performances, all of the dresses had to be paid for, or there was a collection of dresses that were donated at one point that kind of rotated through through everybody. It's kind of funny. You see, I'm sure you can see in the archive even of this very similar dress popping up on across multiple years. Yeah. There's a picture, I think, of me and Laura with the dress that we both wore when we were first starting with young Madison, and we took a picture together. I don't know if you have that yet, but I bet you I can find it and send it to you. And then a little side thing too, I can't really talk because I just talked about parents paying so much money for this stuff, including Gaylord Weekend, right? I can't not talk about my mom. She don't not donated a lot of dresses, but she did a lot of dresses for a lot of either making them originally or, adding more unique sleeves to update a lot of the dresses. And she was kind of the on-go seamstress, I think, for a while for a lot of us. Dresses break all the time. So I think one year my dress zipper just completely just ripped in half on one of the dresses she made. And of course, she was back there sewing me up. A similar thing happened with Mackenzie Seraphin, who like her sleeve broke or something when she was like lifting her arm up, and my mom sewed it back up like in between a dance. She was the go-to person for, she always brought her sewing kit with her. Silver Bells in the City. I know that was ongoing things. At first, we were at the community playhouse something. It was the one right next to Impressions 5. Riverwalk, yeah, the Riverwalk Theater. And we would perform sometimes during the parade, sometimes right after it or right before it. We do a couple sets of that. Of course, go to the green room and hang out there. But that was a good performance. It was, kind of a big thing in the middle of like not our busy season. We do a couple sets of dances, be able to go, if we lucked out timing wise, be able to go to the parade after or get some hot chocolate, something like that. It was fun. I know at the end of my time there, we included more music, like live performance music into our performances with the big ones. And then eventually some of the smaller ones, more me specifically on the flute. But, we'd sing Irish carols during the Silver Bell show with guitar, flute, and basically anything that anybody wanted to play too. And that was a really cool part, other than just the dancing, that we were able to share some of the Irish cultural heritage stuff that we got to talk about and perform. I know we had a couple practices, but it was basically a figure out yourself. I gave a couple lessons just because I'm a professional musician to some capacity, and I'd been playing flute for basically the same amount of time that I danced, and then picked up Irish flute after my mom, probably about eighth grade, ninth grade. And that was all hand taught, kind of, we had sheet music. So it wasn't the traditional way of learning most of the time, but a lot of us were musicians, either by band or other music, like choir or something like that too. So I know how to count to like 12 in Gaelic and then rest. And I learned that not technically through IDCL, but it was definitely incorporated into it because of the Heinzmans. That was something they taught of, we had to count in Gaelic while we were doing stretches. I know some people tried to learn some stuff on the side of it though. Maybe not necessarily IDCL organized. Peggy was a very big advocate for us learning about our cultural heritage and just in general too, not even specifically Irish heritage. That was always a message of hers, was to a lot of the genealogy and a lot of connecting to your roots as a person and learning about where you come from. That was a really big thing with her that is definitely translated into my everyday life. But Peggy was she was one of the founders of the IDCL. her daughter Molly danced with the group when it was first starting. I don't know too much about the history of back then with them or what the culture was like for that, but I would imagine it was very similar of doing it for the love of Irish dancing. Peggy was one of those people who was not a motherly figure, not a grandmother figure, but a good, strong adult person in their life. And she went through so much. She lost her daughter at a ridiculously young age, but she treated all of us like her kids in a way, even though we don't, I didn't see her as a mother figure, but she cared about all of us so much. Um, invited us out to go do stuff other than IDCL. Like one time I went with Madison and Mackenzie Seraphin to go clean out her garage. And of course, there was a whole bunch of little like cat statues. Oh, I have one on my desk literally right now of just like these porcelain cats that I think Molly collected. And she shared, the same values of respecting your tradition and, learning more about your past with her daughter. And of course, that extended onto us. I know when a couple months after Molly passed, I was about the same size that Molly was and dress wise, and I ended up getting handed down her solo dress, which I still have. And that would it turned into my favorite dress. It was really pretty. It was a tree of life with birds on the side of it, and of course a green color because all of my dresses were green because I was a redhead. And it had beautiful copper on the side of it. So that's a kind of a good example of Peggy really cared about passing on her traditions and her background and really having a love for us as her dancers, as she would probably say. Really, really great. Feisty. She's a strong Irish woman. I was there for forever. When I was younger, the people that are sticking out to me was Emily. I don't remember her last name. She has curly hair, but she was my big girl. We were assigned like younger. When you were a senior, you would be assigned a young person to like guide. And Molly was my big girl, or not Molly, Emily. Molly Stevens was there for a while as well when I was younger. Of course, the Reeves were all there, and the Martells were all there, basically until Mary Kate graduated, and they were one of the founding families as well. Of course, your family was there, the Moran, Seraphins. You notice I'm mentioning all of them in families. It was kind of a family thing because even my younger sister was involved. If one family, it was not unnormal for if one sibling to join, all of the siblings to join, or maybe not all of the siblings, but you were one of the strays of the ones who didn't dance with the dance company. So obviously, I had my youngest brother, do that, and then the Seraphins had Morgan. But yeah, it was definitely a family ordeal. It was the Matsons too. Yeah, and they were a big family. They took up like half of the dance company at one point. It's definitely a family thing. So, yeah, families coming into one bigger family. I remember a lot of the retirement communities and just kind of public service in general is what's really stuck with me into my career now. I should give a little background, but I'm a music librarian at Oberlin Conservatory Library and public librarianship and being with the public and public service is a very big part of what I do every day. And I don't think I would have been doing that without IDCL. We got to meet a lot of people through this group, either other performers or other musicians, but even, the community members and being able to perform in front of them was a really unique experience. And you get to, we're all Irish, or at least most of us that were in that group had some Irish background, but we got to do some cultural festival that really opened up, or at least my view of the world, in mid-Michigan, which is not as diverse as some other places in the world, but I got to experience other local groups and still in contact with a lot of people, still hang out. I do Stardew with Mackenzie or play Stardew with Mackenzie regularly, as well as get to see people periodically when I make trips up there again. And then more specific stories, of course, anything from Gaylord. I specifically remember my senior year of getting little presents from Peggy. So I have it right here. Wow. So I got, what is this? You know what this is. The Belk, the Irish Belk, the white china.
Baklava.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And like the cup too. So she gave this all to us our senior year of dancing. And that was just a cool experience too, being able to come up with a dance with my fellow seniors and perform it at Gaylord. So there's so much. I remember one story in particular too, later on when after I started driving. So this was probably 2015, my guess, when we moved into what would become Megan's studio. We were going out to practice, and then no one remembered to grab the key for the building. So we kind of like all drove there, got there, and turned around and left. Other places, I mean, other memories, broader memories, there's a lot. So we had a lot of practice places throughout my time there. And that was another interesting part of the experience was one year we were in the barn for practicing in the Abbott's backyard. One year we were in the Williamston Community Center. Well, it was still kind of nothing in there other than the retirement community and I think the public library when Williamston branch was in there. Really weird places. We were right next to the DMV in Lansing for a while. That was strange. Or Secretary of State. Sorry, I live in Ohio now. Secretary of State. We were right next to that in Lansing, kind of by the shopping center over there. The reunion. So it was a year after I graduated, so it didn't really even feel like a reunion too much, other than I did get to see a lot of people who I hadn't seen in years, including Emily Bass. That's her name, Emily Bass, who was my senior when I was a kiddo. Yeah, that was cool. I we had it felt like the same kind of big old potluck just because all of us knew each other. All of us were family at that point. I know when we were at the Knights of Columbus, they did more alumni dances. And that was really cool to be able to step on stage again, even only after a year, but it was cool to do. More specifically, I don't remember. The thing that I remember about that was I was sitting close to some of the big girls when we were doing the unicorn song. So like the pub runners would perform the song The Unicorn and we'd come up all with a dance with it. I don't know when that started, but it was taught to me when I was a young kid. And I was sitting there next to the people that taught me the unicorn song while their kids were also on stage learning it for the first time, like their actual children learning it. And that was really cool, especially, 1 year after I left. In my perspective, there was a shift when I was younger in the group. When I was younger, it was very much a mentoring situation. And to some extent, it definitely was when I was older. It just felt like I wasn't mature enough to mentor people. Like high school, I think is what it was, versus I saw the big girls when I was younger and I was like, oh man, they're adults. What the heck? And they were like sophomores in high school. I'm sure there was that extent as well. Kind of the older kids helped the younger kids learn how to do stuff. It did change with who was making the dances, though. I know when I was a younger kid, the big girls basically made all of the dances and would teach them to the younger kids. But I know the younger kids, when I was a senior, wanted to make their own dances, and that was really cool for them to get that outlet. Of course, there was Peggy, who was kind of the ringleader and the person who managed us and got us shows. Didn't teach us necessarily. When I was younger, the big kids taught the younger kids dances and the dances and different where to go basically. When I was older, we had Megan who would basically help us make the dances and show us steps, that kind of stuff. Been more of a dance instructor versus when we were younger, we really didn't have a dance instructor. Of course, there's all the parents. So my mom's role was the seamstress. A couple other moms would definitely be the ones maybe at one point more to contact and act as security for the dancers or bring food to dancers, that kind of stuff. Dance babies as in actual babies. My baby brother Finn was very into dance, and I know Megan had a Elin, who was the oldest. Yeah, that was about the same age as Finn, and they'd be together at dance. And I think the Madsen had a couple babies as well when we were there. Parents would watch them most of the time, but it was a family environment. They kind of just participated basically in the way that they wanted to, of seeing their older siblings on stage dancing and wanting to join, or being corralled by a parent in the back. That was super cute. My mom made a couple dresses in like little guide suits for them as well with the brat, and it was just adorable to see them. They couldn't participate, they couldn't dance, obviously, until they were old enough to, but they were definitely involved because their families were. They wanted to be involved. I'm not much of a baby person, but no, it was so cute to see them. They were copying us. Finn would take Elan's hand and they would basically try to do a Kaylee spin just by holding each other's hand and kind of spinning around. It was adorable. Oh, and then sometimes we'd pull them out on stage too during Step About. Yeah. We'd pull them on stage and they'd basically walk up and down with us while we were trying to do like threes and stuff. So cute. It taught me a lot of patience when I was a senior, of patience for other people, just because they are family and you're dealing with a big group of people who have different opinions, which is not, I guess, something you could get in like school related sports activities or something very similar. But dance was a very, Irish dance and IDCL specifically, were a very interesting environment where we would go perform and do a public service, which was, of course, part of it, as well as something that we were all interested in. And it was a good learning leadership opportunity as well in high school, and got all of these people from all over the community. Not everybody was at the same institution. No one, it wasn't, we weren't competing. We were performing and doing it for the love of dance versus traditional Irish dance culture of competing in feshes and trying to get the best prize. There was really no competition involved, and that was really nice. Teaching you to do it for the love instead of competition.